Week 13 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 12 kickers I'm ranking heading into the week. The first guy, Nick Folk, the New England Patriots. And Nick Folk here, what a season it's been. He's been the best kicker in fantasy points this season, and it seems like each and every game he's about getting double-digit fantasy points or 3 or 4 attempts at a field goal, plus the extra points of the last few games here for Nick Folk. Week 10 versus Cleveland, 9. Week 11 at Atlanta, 14. And Week 12 versus Tennessee, 19 fantasy points. So Week 13, I think this is going to be a grinded-out type of ball game here in the AFC battle at the Buffalo Bills. I know the Bills give up the 20th most fantasy points to kickers on the season, but right now, the way Nick Folk's been going and kicking the football, there's no way I can't rank him number one this week, and he's going to get the opportunities. They're always there this season. The next kick is Justin Tucker of the Baltimore Ravens. So Justin Tucker, still a solid season this year, but not as good as some kickers this year, but still the last 3 out of 4 ball games, he's had double-digit fantasy days, is Tucker. And this week here, Week 13, another great matchup for him at the Pittsburgh Steelers, and another division matchup as well. But anyway, the Steelers give up the 7th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And I think Baltimore is going to score a decent amount of points in this game. The Steelers are bend but don't break type of defense as well, where they're going to have to settle for a few field goals. And I think for the 3rd game in a row here, Justin Tucker will get double digits. The next kicker, Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. So the Bills' great division matchup it's going to be with the New England Patriots. And I know the Patriots give up the least amount of fantasy points to kickers on the season, but right here, Tyler Bass has been a great kicker this season. He's only had one hiccup in the road, and that was Week 11 versus the Indianapolis Colts, where they got blown out and where the weather wasn't all that great as well with the rain. But right here in Week 13 versus New England, this is a big division game. Monday Night Football, obviously, nationally televised, going to get a lot of eyes on the ball game. And I think in this ball game could come down to a field goal between top kickers in this one, Nick Folk and Tyler Bass. I think this week here, Bass is going to have a few opportunities. This Patriot defense bends but don't breaks as well. And I think he has a double-digit fantasy game as well. Number 4, Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Butker and the Chiefs here the last 4 or 5 weeks, they've really kicked things into gear and played well. Butker early in the season, he wasn't doing much for fantasy owners. But the last few weeks here, he's been solid. Week 9 versus Green Bay, 8. Week 10 at the Raiders, 12. And Week 11 versus the Cowboys, 7. So coming off a bye week here, they versus division foe, the Denver Broncos, is this Kansas City Chief team. And I think Harrison Butker, he's been comfortable now. He's been more accurate. And now with the rest and the bye week here, I think this week he's going to be good once again. And I think he'll score easily anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points. He's in the top offense, and they're going to get opportunities in this one. Number 5, Daniel Carlson of the Vegas Raiders. So Daniel Carlson last week, 19 fantasy points at the Dallas Cowboys. In the last couple weeks, he's starting to get it going. Week 11, 7. Week 12 at Dallas, 19. And here, Week 13, back home in Vegas, where he kicks the football very well here versus the Washington football team. That their defense is mediocre, 16th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. But right here, I think Daniel Carlson has a good one. And it wouldn't surprise me to see him hit double digits once again this week. Number 6, Matt Gay of the Los Angeles Rams. So Matt Gay here, he's been solid this season, and he's on one of the top offenses in all of pro football. And obviously, he's going to get a lot of opportunities. So right here, he's got a great matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I give up the 9th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So the last few weeks here for Gay, Week 9 versus Tennessee, 11. Week 10 at San Francisco, 4. And Week 12 at Green Bay, 8. Pretty much, for the most part this season, his ceiling is double digits, and his floor is about 7 or 8 fantasy points. So in this one versus a weak Jacksonville team, I think we see 7 or 8 fantasy points here from Matthew Gay. And I got him at number 6. Number 7, Michael Badgley of the Indianapolis Colts. So Badgley, he's taken the job by storm early in the season with Blankenship down and never looking back. So Badgley, he's a good kicker this season. He's had a bounce back year after struggles with the Chargers and a cup of coffee with other teams over the last couple of years. So the last few weeks here for Badgley, Week 10 versus the Jaguars, 9. Week 11 at Buffalo, 11. Week 12 versus Tampa Bay, 8. And now with a great matchup, Week 13 at the Houston Texans that give up the 15th most fantasy points to kickers. They're going to be in the red zone early and often here as this Colt team. They're a high-powered offense all of a sudden over the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And Badgley's been very good. So in this one, I think 8 to 10 fantasy points is an easy mark for him to hit this week. Number 8, Greg Joseph of the Minnesota Vikings. So Greg Joseph last week, a horrible fantasy game where he only had 2 points or 0 points, depending if you get penalized, negative points for missing extra points. But the last few weeks before that, week 8 versus Dallas 11, week 9 at Baltimore 7, week 10 at the Chargers 10, week 11 versus Green Bay 7, and last week 0 at the Niners. But this week here, slam dunk matchup for him at the Vikings, at the Lions that give up the most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So Greg Joseph, it's been a great first year for him, in my opinion, with this Viking team. He's going to have a lot of opportunities. He's indoors at Detroit, and the Vikings should be in the red zone early and often. So in this one, he's going to be fine, and I think he could get 7 or 10 fantasy point range. Number 9, Robbie Gould of the San Francisco 49ers. So Robbie Gould, he's resurrected this season with a good year. And ever since he came off the injured reserve list, he's been a good kicker for the Niners and fantasy owners. And somehow he's still available in 76% of fantasy leagues. So the last few games here for Gould: week 9 versus Arizona 4, week 10 versus the Rams 9, week 11 at Jacksonville 13, week 12 versus Minnesota 10, and this week here at the Seattle Seahawks, I could see a ball game, division game once again here, where we're going to see a lot of field goal attempts. 49ers, in my opinion, have a few opportunities in the red zone, and this Seattle team, they just fell apart this season. They've lost 4 or 5 in a row now. And this week here, I think San Francisco has their way. And Robbie Gould, he'll hit 2 or 3 field goals with a few extra points. Number 10, Ryan Suckup of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we know the Bucs are one of the most explosive offenses in all the NFL this season. And Suckup this year, he's been pretty good over the last few weeks. Week 10 at Washington 4, week 11 versus the Giants 12, and week 12 at Indianapolis 7. So this week, another great matchup with the Atlanta Falcons, who are one of the worst teams in the league. They can't stop anybody pretty much on defense. And right here, the only problem I have is I think Tampa Bay is going to score a lot of touchdowns, where Suckup's only going to maybe get 1 or 2 field goal opportunities and maybe only score 6 or 7 fantasy points. So this week here, Ryan Suckup, still a decent game I think he has, but I don't think he'll be as good because I think they score more touchdowns than settling for field goals. Number 11, Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals. So over the last few weeks here, he's been one of the better kickers in fantasy football is McPherson. And right here, he's got a slam dunk matchup versus the Chargers that give up the 3rd most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So right here, the last few weeks for McPherson: week 9 versus Cleveland 3, week 11 at Vegas 19, and week 12 versus Pittsburgh 13. So right here will be a shootout versus them and the Chargers, I would think, this game, the way these two offenses have been operating all season. And McPherson, like I mentioned, he's a good kicker, rookie kicker as well, big boot, 50-plus yarders. We've seen him all year hit with ease. And this week here versus the Chargers, I think he'll get maybe a few of those, but at least anywhere from 8 to 10 fantasy points. And the 12th and final kicker I'm ranking this week's Matt Prater of the Arizona Cardinals. So Prater, it's been an up and down season for him, but it hasn't been his fault over the last few weeks. He could just kick as good as many as attempts he's going to get. So on the season here, he had a few monster games early in the year, but the last few weeks, he hasn't done much. Week 9 at San Francisco 6, week 10 versus the Panthers 5, and week 11 at Seattle 5. But this week here in week 13, Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins should be back in the ball game here for this Cardinal team, where they're going to get in the red zone more, going to get more opportunities. And the Chicago Bears do give up the 8th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So right here, the Bears are bend but don't break type of defense in Soldier Field. And I think in this one, Matt Prater bounces back with a pretty decent game. So that's the top 12 kickers I'm ranking for week 13 of the fantasy football season.